20 years to the day after the siege began, the city awakens to a crisp spring morning that carries both memory and promise. It is April 6, 2012, and we are in Sarajevo, Bosnia-Herzegovina. The scars remain visible. Buildings still bearing bullet holes like unhealed wounds. The rebuilt National Library standing where its predecessor burned for 3 days in August of 1992, taking with it 2 million books and irreplaceable manuscripts spanning centuries of the Bosnian culture. In the Vaskarcija market, where Ottoman-era craftsmen once sold their wares to merchants from across the Balkans, vendors now serve coffee to tourists come seeking traces of the cosmopolitan city that hosted the 1984 Winter Olympics. The smells of the city mingle with exhaust fumes, while the call to prayer from Gazi Husrev Bey Mosque echoes across red tile roofs that have been painstakingly rebuilt, tile by tile. At a cafe table outside of the old cover market, Kemal Kuzpashik sips his morning coffee while reading Oslobodenje, the same newspaper he edited throughout the siege when it was published in a basement by candlelight, the staff risking sniper fire to document the world's indifference to their suffering. Today's headline speaks of European Union negotiations, economic reforms, the slow bureaucratic machinery of post-conflict reconstruction. But it's the smaller stories that capture his attention. An obituary for a man who died in Germany, listed as a refugee from Bosnia, despite living there for 2 decades. A brief mention of war crimes trials in The Hague, where former neighbors argue about events that happened a generation ago but feel like yesterday. The war ended, he tells his companion, a young journalist who wasn't born when the first shells fell on the city. But the peace is still being negotiated, one conversation at a time. This is the paradox of post-conflict Bosnia, a country that exists but barely functions, where peace has been institutionalized but not internalized, where the international community declare victory while the people continue living with the war's most enduring legacy, the transformation of neighbors into strangers, of shared spaces into parallel worlds. This is part 8 of our series on the Yugoslav breakup, The Long Shadow. You know how they say you can't understand someone until you walk a mile in their shoes? Well, I'd argue you can't understand a nation until you've walked through its history. Not just the highlight reel or the sanitized version you find in textbooks. I mean really getting into its DNA. Those defining moments that shaped everything that came after. Those moments where paths were chosen, where decisions were made in palaces and backrooms and city streets that changed the course of millions of lives. I'm your host, Paul, and this is Double Helix, Blueprint of Nations, where we unravel the genetic code of countries through their most transformative moments. Think of it like ancestry testing, but for entire nations. We dig deep into the historical DNA, finding those crucial moments that made countries who they are today. Over the past 7 episodes, we've traced Yugoslavia's journey from the mosaic state to bloody dissolution. Through the economic collapse and institutional paralysis that followed Tito's death, the nationalist awakening that transformed neighbors into enemies, Slovenia's brief war that established a precedent for dissolution, Croatia's homeland war that introduced ethnic cleansing to our modern vocabulary, Bosnia's descent into genocide that shocked the world's conscience, and Kosovo's final reckoning that ended Yugoslavia's idea forever. So today, we'll explore the aftermath. How the international community attempted to rebuild what nationalism had destroyed, why justice proves so elusive, and what Yugoslavia's dissolution teaches us about the fragility of diverse societies in our own increasingly polarized world. First, let me take you to a moment that captures both the promise and the limitation of international justice. We are at The Hague in the Netherlands, May 12th of 2011. Ratko Mladic enters the defendant's dock of the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia. 16 years after his indictment for genocide, crimes against humanity, and war crimes. At 69, the man once known as the Butcher of Bosnia has aged badly. His notorious swagger is now replaced by the shuffling gait of someone whose time has finally run out. In the gallery, survivors of Srebrenica sit in rows, their faces etched with complex emotions. Among them is Hatice Mehmedovic, who lost 2 sons in the 1995 massacre and has spent years advocating for justice. She's testified multiple times at trials, each time relieving the trauma in sterile legal language, each time hoping that formal recognition of her suffering might somehow bring her peace. When I first saw him on television, she tells reporters during a break, I felt nothing. Not anger, not satisfaction, just emptiness. 26 years I've been waiting for this moment, and now that it's here, I realize it won't bring back my children. It won't undo what was done. It just makes the loss official. Her words capture the fundamental limitation of post-conflict justice. Its ability to establish legal truth without healing emotional wounds. The International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia would ultimately indict 161 individuals and secure 92 convictions over its 24-year existence. It established crucial legal precedents, recognizing rape as an instrument of genocide, establishing superior responsibility for commanders who failed to prevent subordinates' crimes, and rejecting following orders as a defense. Yet for many survivors, justice came too late, cost too much, and changed too little. Courts could establish that genocide occurred, that systematic rape was used as a weapon, that ethnic cleansing followed methodical patterns, but establishing these facts in The Hague couldn't make divided communities trust each other again. It couldn't make displaced refugees feel safe returning home. It couldn't make children born after the wars understand why their parents still speak in whispers about their neighbors. Take a trip with me to Mostar in Bosnia-Herzegovina. It is now September of 2015. The city's famous bridge, destroyed during the war and rebuilt with international funding, once again arcs gracefully over the Neretva River. UNESCO hailed this reconstruction as a symbol of reconciliation, but the reality below tells a different story. In the city's schools, Croatian and Bosniak children attend classes in the same buildings but follow different curricula. They speak different languages, though they understand each other perfectly, and learn different versions of the same historical events. They enter through separate doors, they have separate lunch periods, and their teachers deliberately avoid interaction that might blur the ethnic boundaries their communities have fought to establish. This system, diplomatically called 2 schools under one roof, exemplifies how post-conflict Bosnia institutionalized separation rather than integration. The Dayton Peace Agreement, signed in November of 1995, ended the killing, but perpetuated the divisions that had made killing possible. Rather than attempting to recreate multi-ethnic Bosnia, a dream that had died in concentration camps and mass graves, international negotiators accepted ethnic partition as the price for peace. The resulting constitutional structure reads like a monument to complexity. 2 main entities, 10 cantons, 140 municipalities, and the special district of Breakup, all governed by overlapping institutions designed to ensure no ethnic group could dominate the others. 3 rotating presidents, a council of ministers requiring ethnic balance, and decision-making processes so cumbersome they make the European Union look like a model of efficiency. We created a state that exists on paper but barely functions in practice, one European diplomat confided years later. We called it success because the shooting stopped. But we institutionalized the very ethnic divisions that caused the shooting in the first place. Yugoslavia's dissolution wasn't just about the Balkans. It fundamentally reshaped how the world thinks about sovereignty, about intervention, and the responsibility to protect vulnerable populations from state violence. Let me show you another moment that captures both possibility and limitation. We are now in a park near Sarajevo's former front lines, watching children whose parents barely speak to each other play football together. They invent rules as they go, argue about fouls in a mixture of languages, and celebrate goals with the unconscious camaraderie that adults have learned to suppress. These children represent what scholars call the post-memory generation, those born after the wars ended but raised on stories of division and loss. They inhabit the same physical spaces as their parents but navigate fundamentally different psychological landscapes. For them, ethnic boundaries are institutional facts rather than lived experiences, abstract categories imposed by school systems and electoral laws rather than meaningful social divisions. Watching them play, elderly residents sometimes glimpse echoes of the city they remembered, where ethnic identity mattered less than personal character, and where shared experiences created bonds stronger than communal boundaries. Now, 30 years after Yugoslavia's dissolution began, the patterns that destroyed it have spread far beyond the Balkans. The psychological patterns that enabled Yugoslavia's dissolution feel uncomfortably familiar in our current moment of democratic fragility. Social media algorithms sort users into increasingly homogeneous echo chambers, replicating the media landscape that prepared Yugoslavia for war. Political leaders who gain support by defining their supporters against threatening others employ tactics pioneered by Milosevic and Tudman. The erosion of shared civic spaces mirror the social fragmentation that preceded Yugoslavia's violent breakup. These parallels aren't coincidental. They reflect deeper truths about how political communities hold together or tear apart under pressure. Shared institutions matter less than shared civic culture. Economic interdependence provides insufficient protection against identity-based mobilization. Democratic procedures without constitutional safeguards for minority rights can accelerate rather than prevent ethnic conflict. As we trace Yugoslavia's genetic code to its conclusion, we discover that it isn't really a story about ancient ethnic hatreds finally exploding. It's a story about modern political choices, how leaders choose nationalism over cooperation, how institutions fail to prevent elite manipulation, how ordinary citizens found themselves sorted into categories that determine whether they lived or they died. Yugoslavia wasn't destroyed by inevitable forces, but by specific decisions made by identifiable people at crucial moments. Each choice narrowed possibilities for peaceful resolution until violence seemed the only remaining option. But if these were choices, then different choices might have produced different outcomes. Economic intervention addressing Yugoslavia's debt crisis might have prevented the centrifugal forces that made nationalism attractive. Constitutional arrangements that protected minority rights while enabling majority governance might have channeled grievances through institutions rather than bullets. Today, the land that once comprised Yugoslavia presents a complex mosaic. Slovenia and Croatia joined the European Union. Montenegro may follow in 2028. Serbia struggles with democratic backsliding. Bosnia exists but barely functions, and Kosovo remains partially recognized. Yet beneath these political divisions, evidence suggests ordinary citizens increasingly question the boundaries their leaders drew in blood. The 2024 Balkan Barometer shows 82% of regional residents trust in cooperation, an all-time high. Young people approach identity with fluidity. Amira, a 24-year-old university student in Sarajevo, says this: "My mother is Bosniak, my father is Serbian Orthodox. Their marriage was an act of resistance then, now it's just my family. I speak 3 languages, I celebrate multiple holidays, and identify primarily as European. We're creating spaces where those categories matter less than our professors think they should." All right, that's going to do it for us on the breakup of the former Yugoslavia. But before I finish, let me drop some personal insights as I like to do at the end of each of these series. When I started this series, I thought I was telling a story about something that happened over there or to other people in the past. But the deeper I got into it, the more I felt like I was holding up a mirror to right now. And what I saw, honestly, scared me. But those psychological patterns we trace through Yugoslavia, the way communities fragment when trust erodes, the way political entrepreneurs can weaponize fear, that is not ancient history, folks. That is happening right now in our social media feeds, in our politics, in the way we've stopped seeing people who disagree with us as neighbors and started seeing them as enemies. This is true in Rwanda. This was true in Spain. It was true in Colombia. So here's what I need from you. I'm going to be really direct about this. If this series meant something to you, if it made you think differently about how societies hold together or how quickly they can fall apart, then I need your help. First, the practical stuff. Please rate and review the podcast. I know every podcaster says this, but here's why it actually matters. Those ratings help other people find this podcast. And honestly, they keep me going. They're very motivating, so that when I'm up thinking about ethnic cleansing statistics or thinking about the next episode or what other sad story I'm going to get into, this makes it worth it. Knowing that people are listening and that the work matters to someone, that is absolutely fuel for me. Here's the bigger thing, though. Don't let the stories just wash over you. Talk about them to other people. Share them. When you see those patterns starting in your own community, the us versus them rhetoric, the erosions of shared spaces, the weaponization, the fear, call it out. Because Yugoslavia teaches us that by the time everyone recognizes the danger, it's usually too late. All right, if you've enjoyed this, drop me a line. I'm on Facebook, I'm on Twitter, X, I'm on email, whatever works. All of that's linked in the show description. Tell me what resonated, what scared you, what gave you hope. Some of my best insights come from listeners who've made a connection. So thank you to those who have, and thank you to those who are still listening. We're taking a quick break, but we'll be back with something special. A collaboration with the folks at Grimdark History. They were so kind as to reach out, and so we'll be collaborating on an episode soon. If you are not familiar with Grimdark History, it is a podcast that merges pop culture with history. It kind of dispels the myths, tells you about what is true and what isn't, and the real history behind some of pop culture's most notable things. We are going to be exploring a period of history together. It is a period in medieval England that is called the Anarchy. It turns out that this period was so incredible it almost sounds like fiction. And that is going to be the theme of our joint episode, when history is stranger than fiction. I know that the rest of season 2 was supposed to be all about exploring more civil conflicts throughout the world, and I named a few a while ago, but having covered Colombia, the American Civil War, the Civil War in Spain, the Rwandan genocide, and now the breakup of Yugoslavia, I think it's time for us to switch gears a little bit. And so we're going to take a look at transformative moments across the world. We'll go to some lesser-known moments, some well-known moments. We'll take a look at all of the different things that have impacted the way nations act and the way our world works today. And remember, Yugoslavia's story is a tragedy, but it doesn't have to be our future. That is a choice, and that choice is still ours to make. This is Paul De La Rosa signing off. Until we talk again, thank you for listening. We will see you soon.